Hey, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about creative resistance and creative block. So, if you've ever found yourself seizing up when you try to get started on a new creative project that you really love, and that resistance that you feel to doing the creative work is absolutely normal, there's nothing wrong with you. And there are things you can do to really take hold of it and try to change the paradigm. And so we're going to talk about that today. Just to remind everybody, I'm going live via my Facebook page today. This is Jessica Abel at jessicaabel.com, which means that any comments that you make are going to be publicly visible. But I hope that doesn't stop you, because I think that most everybody deals with this problem, and it is really, really helpful to hear other people's experiences and feel like you are normal and nothing is wrong with you. This is the Growing Gills Book Club. We're doing chapter 18 today, Resistance. We're in the final stretch here. We have 3 more meetings for the Growing Gills Book Club. Welcome today. I see everybody showing up. Hoping my tech is all fixed today. I did a test this morning with a new mic. Excuse me. And I think that it's all working, but let me know what you see. Seeing a lot of people showing up here. David is already saying, I feel resistance right now. Is this a bonus episode rather than chapter 18? No, Emmeline, this is chapter 18, which is the resistance, not the good kind of resistance. There's good kind and then there's bad kind. We're going to talk about the bad kind today, but we're also going to talk about what to do about it. So I think everybody feels resistance in getting down to creative work basically every day, like every minute. You know, when you sit down to do the work, when you're sitting down, that moment of sitting down, even if it's absolutely habitual and absolutely normal and you're going to do it, you don't stop, you still feel that little to kind of get yourself into that work and feel, get stuck into it and kind of move forward. And I think that that's completely normal, because what you're doing is asking your brain to work, and brains are inherently resistant to work because that uses energy, and we are biological beings who are programmed to use as little energy as possible to get done what we want to get done. So if you feel that way, you are not crazy. It actually is a little bit hard to get started with stuff. So there are a few things you can do to deal with resistance. This is a very short chapter in the book, so I'm just going to this is mostly going to be Q&A and just talking about what resistance is like. This is basically, I think that the number one step with resistance is when you have that moment of resisting whatever it is your next step is. And sometimes the resistance can be so massive that it feels like creative, quote unquote, block. I don't really believe in the idea of block specifically, but it can feel that way if you have been in a state of resistance for a long time. But there will be triggers for that. There will be triggers. And maybe the trigger is your desk. Maybe it is literally what you see there. But then it's not like the piece of wood that your desk is made of. It's something that's in association with your desk. So the first thing you want to be doing is to sit with that feeling of resistance and encounter it for a while, like feel it for a while and figure out what are the things, one of the things I say in the chapter that I think is really useful is mind map about it. Do you guys know what a mind map is? Basically, you start with something in a central circle, like whatever you are resisting, like that topic. And then you create lines out from it, and you create other circles around there, and you have associated terms, and then break those things down. This is, one of the things we're talking about this month in the Autonomous Creative Collective, which is the private membership group, the community that goes with the Creative Focus Workshop, is we're talking about the should monster. Our theme this month is the should monster. And the first thing we talked about was this idea of, where do those shoulds come from? What relationships do they have with messages that you've received in your life? What are the triggers? And this is very, very connected to that, because resistance is often connected to the should monster, because the should monster comes up and it's scary and it gives you feelings of shame and you want to run away from it, totally naturally, totally understandably. And then you are in a position where you need to kind of pick it apart and figure out what's inside it. Because if you just run away, it's going to come back the next time you sit down. So a place or an environment like your desk can become associated with something that has happened to you or the thoughts that you've had, and it can push you away. And so digging into those thoughts by using something like a mind map, I think is really, really helpful. So the procedure that I kind of outline in the chapter is essentially sitting with this feeling of resistance and being curious about it. What is it? What's inside of it? What are the associations I'm feeling around this? And let yourself have some time and space to kind of think it through. So mind mapping can be really helpful. Then a few other things. First of all, some of the obvious things that can stop you that you may not be sort of thinking about are, is this a project and not a task? You think it's a task, but actually it's a project. And even things like filing a form or something like that can be a project in the sense that it's not something that has one step. It's not just file the form. It's find the form, go to these 6 websites to get this information that I need to fill out the form, fill it out, verify it, check it with your spouse or whatever, then find the portal and submit it, and possibly follow up with an email. Like, there's a whole bunch of steps to it. And so if you just have a thing that says file the form, you're going to resist that first step because you're not going to know what it is. You're like, file, what's this file look like? So actually getting granular about those steps and writing them all down, what are the things that I need, that will help you go, oh, okay, well, if I can't do the whole thing today, but I can look up these websites and get this information and, whatever it is, or I can make a list of the things that need to happen. I can schedule them out. So that's one way to break down certain kinds of resistance. Another kind of resistance comes when you have not decided what it is that you're actually going to do. You haven't actually, you keep bouncing around from one thing to another because you haven't decided which thing that you want to actually focus on. And so that is an idea deck question, right? That's a question of like looking at all the different options, the things you keep bouncing around between, and doing some analysis on them and saying like, well, are any of them more important than other ones? Are any of them, more vital to my creative production? Are any of them on deadline? And then being very, very clear about the no that you need to say to the things you're not working on, that you have to just be very, very specific and clear that I am not going to work on this other thing now. I mean, I may work on it in the future, but like, this is not my choice today. And then put those things away very consciously. So those two pieces, breaking stuff down and deciding what you're going to work on, they both have to do with decisions. They both have to do with just like clarity. And those things can help with like 90% of the cases. But there's also, there's always some, there are always some cases that have to do with the emotional resonance that something has, or emotional connections that something has. And that's like should monsters and sort of deep should monster stuff. And that's when you really need to kind of be able to dive into that. And you can ask questions like, how is this pushing my buttons? Like, what are the things that are getting to me about this? And then you need to think about that root concern. So the task on the surface may be, write the next chapter of my memoir, but what it's triggering for you is thinking about, say, your sister, and that you need to run something past your sister in order to feel like okay about writing about an incident that involved her in the past. You don't want to talk to her about it because she's a pain in the butt about this stuff and is not very understanding. And so you feel a fear of like confronting your sister about this and, getting her permission essentially, or her sign off on this, on what you're doing. So that if you look back to that and you go, okay, I need to either have this conversation with my sister and clear this up, or I need to decide I do not need permission because it's my story. And when you get back to that root piece of it, all the writing stuff falls away. You don't need to write. What you need to do is solve that root problem, get into that root problem. And you can create an action plan around that. It doesn't have to be like call her right now, but you have to figure out what is the thing and make an action plan. So it's, everything you've learned throughout Growing Gills is going to come back into play when you're trying to address resistance. And that's pretty much what the chapter is about, is pretty much that process. And now I'm going to jump into questions and see where we're at there. Okay. So Scylla says, I think my resistance with tidying my studio comes from the sense of having failed so massively on all fronts in previous years. I think, Scylla, one thing I would say is that sounds very like sort of catastrophizing, like every failed everywhere all the time for forever is too big a thing. And I get why that would feel, if you feel like there are failures in various places in your life, that would be very painful to look at. We're going to get next week, not next week, on Wednesday, next time, we're going to get to the restart activity, which will probably help you a lot, because it's that thing of just kind of like basic level triage. But the thing I would say is start off with looking at where are you doing okay? Start off with where are you doing fine? Not amazing and I finished everything I wanted to finish and all that other stuff, but where are you succeeding at a very basic level of just taking care of yourself and just doing the basic that you need. Start with that, and start with the smallest possible step you can get into in terms of cleaning your studio in order to move yourself forward. Maybe that just means like one tiny corner of a desk, or like you just need to clear off this wall that's behind your computer so that you're not looking at something back there when you're sitting down at your computer. Break it down to the tiniest possible step you can do and reward yourself for that step, and give yourself also a sense that cleaning the thing is the object. In this case, you're just going to say, it's just about tidying this thing up, and try to like diminish the importance of the activity itself so that it doesn't feel like it has to be connected to this huge other thing. And I don't know if that helps, but hopefully those steps will help a little bit. But we can talk about that in the ACC as well. Bring that up in the Autonomous Creative Collective, and I'm sure people will have lots of really good stuff to share there. That's something we've talked about a bunch of times, like how do you deal with this residue of shoulds, and it's perfect time in the Should Monster month to talk about these kinds of feelings. So be sure to bring that up there. Susie likes to do mind mapping in by hand and with illustrations in color, which is great. I think that's a really great way to do it. I think the natural, like the connection between your hand and your eye is great. But I also think it's important not to raise the bar too high. And any kind of crappy, whatever works for you is fine, just to get the ideas out. Okay, so Liz says, since you pointed out that small tasks are often projects, I've managed to stop feeling so bad for resisting the quote-unquote little tasks. It really helps me to think through all of those steps. Yes, even small things are projects. And it's not so much that you resist like the actions of the project. You may be able to get through those actions fine, but you don't know what they are. And until you know what they are, you're like, whoa, that looks scary. There's a bunch of stuff in there. I don't know what it is. And you can't move forward. So that's really the trick, is to figure out what's in there so that you can move forward with it. Okay. David says, my resistance right now is coming from being stuck in the forest. I need to ask new people about my work, but I'd like to send my graphic novel out to agents. But I don't know whether to continue on with what I'm doing and trust my instincts that my concept is good, or stop where I'm at so I don't have to redo everything. This is a really tough place to be. Oh, and I should say about the Dark Forest meeting we had, I apologize for those tech problems the other day. I have I boosted the sound on the video, and I edited out the whole first half, and it starts with the recording that I made, and then the Q&A, and I've created subtitles, and I'm uploading that all to YouTube, and it'll be on the archive page. I may actually replace as well, like cut out part of the recording from last week as well, so that and add the subtitles so that you guys can actually see what happened. So, but I think that is, I'm bringing that up partly, David, because I think that's really relevant, that like being in the dark forest is part of the process. And I think it is part of learning to trust yourself and trust your own instincts and know that you are the one to solve these problems. It sounds like you have a couple different things going on. You say you need to ask a few people about my work. Okay, so that's one thing, or several things, several different people to ask for feedback, and maybe picking one of those people to get some feedback from and have a focus session about what the questions are that still are there for you. Maybe that's a first step. So then you can kind of bounce ideas off them. You can get their, clean take on the work, just one person, and then you can start making a decision about whether it's time to send to agents. Now, if you haven't published before, you're not going to want to send to agents without having finished a draft. Especially for graphic novels, most agents will not work with a new author who has like an unfinished work and just a proposal. Whether or not you need to redo everything is not their concern, basically. But you don't necessarily have to have it all done in final artwork, but I think you have to have it all written and cleanly thumbnailed out so that they can see what's going on there, and also know that you are able to carry through a story. So that's just a technical side question, and maybe you've done and sold graphic novels before, and if you have, then you may be able to sell on a proposal. But it's pretty tough if you're looking for new agents to take you on to do something partial, just as a baseline thing. And I do feel you about like being worried about having to redo everything. Stages of work in comics are really, really demanding. But definitely, I think thinking about this in terms of doing thumbnails and maybe using the visual scripting method that I talk about on my blog. You can look that up there, look up visual scripting. That's a way to lay out an entire book without having to draw it a million times. So check that out. Allison says, I'm always astonished that something I think is a 5-minute job is in fact an hour, like call the bank. I feel ya. Happens all the time. Okay, let's see. Scylla says, yes, it's a negative thought and not constructive, but I think I need to feel and face those emotions to get rid of them. I'm doing a Pomodoro and it's so slowly working. Thanks for the answer. Yeah, I think that step-by-step, just asking yourself to do one Pomodoro, so a 25-minute session or even a 5-minute session, and feel the things. And as you're feeling them, write down what you're feeling. Like, write down what the associations are. This is the mind map question. It's like, write down what these thoughts are for you, get them out of your head and onto paper, and then you can start to sort them out and say, well, which ones of these things are things that I need to grieve? I need to feel bad about this and then let it go. Which are things that are should monster, things that come from outside and that you want to figure out a container for and a way of sort of talking yourself down from that feeling. By getting them out onto paper, you're going to be able to do that more effectively. Okay, Gerardo says, hi, Jessica, good day. How do you manage to be creative in an ambient where you have continuous distractions? What if you don't have a choice about your place of work, I assume? And I mean, many of us are in places right now with a lot of distractions, especially if you are a parent working from home and you have kids at home. There are constant distractions. The answer I have for that is very partial and it has to be very particular to your situation. But I do think that the procedure of, or the basic approach of saying, like, everybody has a job to, you have to balance this with your family members or other people in your workspace. You have to have conversations with them. You have to create boundaries. And if your kids are very small, if it's a problem with having kids at home, they're not going to respect those boundaries. But gradually you can train them to do so, to train each other to respect each other's boundaries. It's, if you are in a situation where you have other adults around who can trade off responsibilities, then maybe it's a matter of being very, very clear about when are you on duty, when are you off duty. If you're talking about an open plan office, then, which nobody is right now, but like maybe that's the situation and that you're talking about in terms of the overall problem, then noise canceling headphones and, again, rules about when are people allowed to interrupt you are all very, very important. Let's see. Emmeline says, sometimes a task I think is an hour or more turns out to be 20 minutes. Cutting and fixing a dowel to hang a kimono on my wall many years ago is a memory that sticks with me of this. That does happen, and it is a wonderful thing when that happens. A lot of times we build stuff up in our heads to be much more complicated than it actually is. And so that's the flip side of all this stuff, is sometimes things are simple, and you can let them be simple. Okay. Liz says that it's okay to grieve the weird things, past versions of myself, my failed tasks, lost opportunities is very freeing. I don't want to live in that state, but allowing myself to feel and move through the weird grief helps. I'm absolutely with you there. I think it's important to understand how important those versions of yourself were to you and are to you, historically speaking, and to feel whatever feelings you have about them. Those feelings are real, whatever they are. And acknowledging those feelings is going to help you move through them and kind of deal with them in a way that, packing them up in a box and trying to ignore them is not going to do. It's just not going to happen. So you really do need to address those things. If there's any more questions, please pop them in the chat. I see a lot of conversation going on about apparently somebody who was a terrible professor who said something terrible, but I missed the initial comment, so I don't know what's going on there. But I see some very, very good advice about how to let go of bad things people said to you in the comments. So thank you for that, you guys. Thanks for picking that one up. Alison says, right now I have several large projects happening at the same time. I'm getting through them each a couple pages at a time. I feel like I'd finish faster if I focused on one, but I'm more productive right now than I've been in a while. Is there an ideal amount of juggling if you're not doing one? No. I mean, I don't know what ideal is for you. I definitely talk to plenty of people who need to have at least two things going on if they have their full day available to them. They can't just sit. Almost nobody can just sit down and write for 8 hours a day if writing is what you do. For most people, and including like the best people, the best writers out there, 4 hours, maybe 4.5 hours is kind of the tops in terms of like your full concentration for something. And so there may be other kinds of projects. Like I have somebody I'm working with right now who has that kind of project, a writing project that's very personal, but then she also has a collaborative project where there's lots of email flying back and forth and a lot of things to deal with and people who need her and all this other stuff. And she balances those things by doing, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So I think that having that be a regular schedule. So every morning writing, every afternoon dealing with other people. Dealing with other people is rewarding for her. She's a bit of an extrovert. She really likes it. And people are saying, they need her, they want her, want stuff. And that's sort of, there's a dopamine satisfaction that comes from that. And so focusing on her writing in the morning is a way of sort of getting through that tough part and going like, in the afternoon, I can kind of relax and be on email and Slack and whatever it is I want to be on. And so I think that is something that's very, very helpful. I don't think having more than those two big projects would be helpful at all. And she's somebody who has her full day open right now. So for many people, it's not reasonable to want to do two things at the same time. But it looks like, Alison, you do have a lot of open time. But I do think having a lot of structure around which things you're working on, which ones are you not working on, and moving things forward is going to really help you speed those projects up. And looking for projects that balance each other in terms of the kind of energy you need to put into them is going to help you as well stick to those kinds of structures. So Annette says, the problem is when I take on one too many, I know as soon as I do it, even if I don't stop, regret is soon to come. Yeah, I think that you can definitely feel like, oh, it's fine for me to take this on. And then it just turns out not to be fine at all. Like once you're there, you're like, oh, wow, it's the thing of thinking it's a task and it's a project that you think, oh, this is going to be a simple little project. It's just going to take this, that, and the other thing, and it'll be done. But in fact, in the end, it takes you just like endless weeks and all this time. Meanwhile, you've committed to 2 or 3 other things, and that's, and you just get overwhelmed. And that's actually what's happened to me the last month or so. Is I realized I had just gotten in over my head on a bunch of different things, and I'm slowly like closing loops and getting more focused and feeling really good about that. Okay. Looks like we're good here. All right, if anybody else has comments or questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat, and I will be here for another few minutes. I just want to take this opportunity again to I'm going to go over what we're doing the rest of the week. So on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about Restart. And Restart is kind of like a global, everybody needs this sometimes approach to when things just really fall apart, and how can you get back into some kind of rhythm, and what is the basic level of triage. We're going to talk about that. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about next steps and what to do next. And I want to make sure all week that I'm answering questions about the Creative Focus Workshop and the Autonomous Creative Collective. This group is going to shut down probably end of next week. So in terms of moving on with this community, that's where the community is going to live. And that's what's going to be, I think, the most exciting and productive way to move forward. But definitely be bringing in questions and comments about resistance, the dark forest, how to restart, all those kinds of things today and also Wednesday and Friday. It looks like we're getting pretty much everything we need to get to here. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to pop in the link for to learn more about the Creative Focus Workshop. And if you are interested in checking that out, that also has the Creative Engine masterclass embedded in that page. And so you can get there immediately. And what we're talking about here with the resistance stage really, I think, encompasses what the Creative Engine can do, because it's kind of all of those things. We talked about all 4 phases of the Creative Engine today. You have the collect phase where you're like, what's in this thing? Why am I resisting? Let me collect all the information here, make a mind map, create all this kind of, or rather extract all this data from what is happening. Is it a project and not a task? Break down the steps. All these things are collect phase elements. Then you have the decide phase when you're like, all right, what do I do with this? How do I either decide like on the next tiny step, or maybe it's something where there's some kind of root cause that I need to get to. Then you take action. You need to take that tiny step. You need to have that hard conversation. You need to do something about it. And then finally you have the reflect phase where you're like, well, what did that change anything? Was it effective? Did I choose the right path to try to fix this resistance problem? How can I now bring this forward into the next step, back into collect, and collect more data about how did it work? How could I do it better next time? How can I make sure that this sticks? How can I make sure that I still have this and it sticks? So that Creative Engine framework applies to this relatively tiny element of the overall creative process as much as it applies to the overall creative process. So you can check that out at that link. I am going to call it for the day, and I will be back on Wednesday to talk about restart, to talk about how do you approach getting started on creative work if you are just incredibly, incredibly stuck, whether it's just stuck for a day, stuck for weeks, stuck for years. How do you restart? And we will talk about that on Wednesday, and I will see you then.